Viktor was a weaver. But his canvases were invisible, and his threads were made of pure meaning. He wove patterns of pure logic, constructing crystal palaces of cause and effect, where every transition was meticulously crafted, and each element occupied its single, inevitable place. In his world, there were no accidents, only imperfections in design. The universe appeared to him as a colossal loom, and he, an apprentice, humbly studied its grand, immutable laws, striving to replicate them in his own small, handcrafted tapestries. He found solace in this predictability, in the cold beauty of the system. It was the only order in a world where his daughter, Eve, was fading away. Her body was a betrayal of all logic. It was deteriorating without reason, at the whim of blind chance, which Viktor despised with every fiber of his being. Doctors, these priests of the flesh, spoke of random mutations, of failures in life's most delicate mechanisms. But to Viktor, this sounded like an admission of ignorance. Their medicines were crude patches on a fabric they failed to comprehend. The illness was a blind knot that couldn't be untangled, only excised along with life itself. Every day, he returned from a world of perfect patterns to a room filled with the scent of medicine and quiet despair, and his ordered universe crumbled to dust in the face of a single, irrational suffering. His mastery was useless. His mind, capable of erecting invisible cathedrals, was powerless to retain warmth in a small, wasting hand. Then, a flaw appeared in his work. Not his mistake. He had checked it 1,000 times. It was a flaw in the loom itself, in the fundamental law of weaving. A false stitch in the grand tapestry. It consistently emerged in the same spot within his most intricate pattern. A tiny vibrating void, a point where the thread of meaning snapped and instantly reappeared, as if pulled through the inverse side of existence. Anyone else would have considered it an impediment, a bothersome glitch to be circumvented. But for Viktor, whose life had become the embodiment of powerlessness, this anomaly was a challenge. He became obsessed with it. He stopped sleeping, studying it, trying to understand its nature. It wasn't a hole, not an absence. It was something else entirely. A presence from the inverse. One night, at the dead end of despair and exhaustion, he stopped trying to fix it. Instead, he tried to use it. He mentally tugged at this phantom thread, much like one might pull a snagging loose end from a sweater, to see what would happen. At that very moment, a book lying on the edge of the table fell to the floor with a dry thud. Viktor's heart froze. He sat motionless for several minutes, listening to the silence of the house. It couldn't be. Coincidence. Fatigue. He focused again on the false stitch, on this fissure in the fabric of existence, and pulled again a little harder. The light bulb above his head flickered and went out. A cold, inhuman exhilaration pierced him. He hadn't found a mistake. He had found a lever pushed through the fabric of reality. All his life he had humbly followed the rules, and now he discovered that there was a loophole within the rules themselves. The temptation was unimaginable, monstrous in its simplicity. He stood up and, as if in a dream, walked to his daughter's room. Eve was sleeping, but her sleep was agony. Her body trembled with fever, pain piercing through her closed eyelids. He sat beside her, gazing at her tormented face, and for the first time in many months, he felt no powerlessness. There was only the icy determination of a master facing a complex task. He closed his eyes and once again located in his consciousness that very point. The false stitch, the wrong knot in the tapestry of her suffering. He envisioned the illness as a tangled, feverish pattern and found within it the central thread, the one responsible for the pain consuming her from within. He didn't consider the consequences. He didn't contemplate the nature of the power he was touching. He thought only that the laws which permitted this suffering were imperfect, and therefore they could and should be broken. He grasped the thread of her pain and pulled, pouring into this action all his despair, all his love, all his pride as a creator correcting a flaw. The convulsion that distorted his daughter's body ceased. Her breathing became even and deep. The wrinkles on her forehead smoothed out. For the first time in many weeks, she truly slept, with the sleep of a healthy child. Viktor watched her, and tears streamed down his cheeks. Tears not of grief, but of triumph. He had done it. He, not the incompetent priests of the flesh. He had found a way. In the morning, when he opened the curtains, he saw a dead sparrow on the windowsill behind the glass. The bird lay on its back, thin legs splayed, as if in silent astonishment at the suddenly halted sky. Viktor looked at it for a moment longer than he should have. In his ordered universe, a new, tiny variable had appeared. A price. But then he heard Eve's quiet laughter emanating from her room, and the image of the dead bird faded, becoming an insignificant and acceptable price for the miracle revealed. The miracle required upkeep. It was not a frozen monument, but rather a fragile plant that needed constant watering from a dark source. In the first week after Eve's healing, Viktor found dead mice and moths frozen in flight on the porch. He removed them before his daughter woke up. With the methodicalness of a gardener weeding, he learned to see these minor deaths as a kind of tax, a payment for utilizing a loophole in the fabric of existence. The life taken from his daughter was returned to her in parts, borrowed from nameless, insignificant creatures. Balance was maintained. His world, albeit by new, self-established laws, was once again in order. He even felt a perverted pride, believing that he understood the true economy of existence better than anyone before him. But the illness was a cunning creditor. A month later, it returned for interest. It began with a slight, persistent chill, then the dry, racking cough returned. One night, Eve again thrashed in a fever, and her cry was no longer a cry of pain, but a thin wail of a creature whose life force was being drained before his eyes. Viktor rushed to his invisible loom, his mind frantically searching for that phantom thread. He pulled, and nothing happened. He pulled again, with the strength of despair. Only a slight tremor passed through his daughter's body. But the fever did not subside. He understood with terrifying clarity. Small payments were no longer accepted. The debt had grown, and a larger currency was required for its repayment. Panic, cold and sharp as a needle, pierced him. He paced around the house like a caged animal until his gaze fell on a photograph on his desk. A snapshot from the last company party. He and his colleague Mark stood side by side with strained smiles. Mark, a man whose life was a thick, sturdy fabric, woven without a single flaw. Healthy, loudly laughing, fortunate. The one who received the promotion Viktor believed he himself deserved. Mark, who had 2 healthy children and a future as clear as a summer noon. In Viktor's mind, warped by pride and fear, Mark's life was not just a life, it was an excess. Undeserved wealth that could be reallocated. He sat in the armchair, closed his eyes. In his mind, there was no longer room for doubt, only the icy resolve of a surgeon. He envisioned the grand tapestry of the city, millions of threads interweaving into destinies. He was not searching for an error, not a false stitch. Now he was searching for a specific, radiant pattern. He found it without difficulty. Mark's thread of life was bright, tautly stretched, vibrating with health and complacency. Viktor mentally touched it. It was warm, resilient. He envisioned a complex knot at the center of this pattern, a knot that bound together Mark's mind, his clear memory, his quick, slightly mocking speech. It was the core of his personality, his strength. Viktor did not tear the thread. That would be crude. That would be murder. He was a weaver, not a butcher. He did what he did best. He began carefully, loop by loop, to unravel this central knot. He was not destroying. He was merely disrupting order. He pulled at one thread of meaning, then another, watching the impeccable pattern unfurl, transforming into a chaotic intertwining, into a meaningless tangle. He felt the power released by this disintegration flowing through invisible channels to him, and through him, into his daughter's room. He became a conduit, transferring order from one life to another. The scream in the next room ceased. Viktor opened his eyes. A deep, complete silence filled the house. He entered Eve's room. She was breathing evenly. The fever had subsided. She slept like a baby, a healthy flush on her cheeks. He touched her forehead. It was cool. The miracle had occurred again, this time. Undeniable, complete. He felt a surge of inhuman power, the exhilaration of a creator who not only corrects a flaw but reshapes the very fabric at will. The next day, he received a call from work. The voice on the phone was bewildered and frightened. During the night, Mark had suffered a massive stroke. Suddenly, out of nowhere. Doctors didn't understand how this could happen to a 40-year-old healthy man. He survived, but something was broken. He didn't recognize his wife, couldn't string 2 words together, his gaze was empty. As if an invisible weaver had threaded a red-hot needle through his brain, burning out patterns of thoughts and memories. He had turned into a body, a shell, devoid of its pattern. Viktor listened in silence, promised to visit, and hung up the phone. He walked to the window and looked at Eve playing in the yard. She was laughing, and her laughter was the most perfect sound in the universe. He knew the price of that laughter. On one scale, the clear, meaningful world of his daughter. On the other, the incoherent moaning of a man whose tapestry he had unraveled into threads to patch the holes in his own. And looking at his healthy, happy daughter, Viktor realized for the first time, without a shadow of a doubt, that his choice was not merely correct. It was the only possible one. The balance had been restored. And he, Viktor, was the one who had established it. The new balance proved to be a demanding deity. The first few months were an idyll, woven from stolen threads. Eve grew, laughed, ran so fast that her hair flashed like copper in the sun. Viktor watched her with the quiet, all-consuming pride of a craftsman admiring his masterpiece. He forgot about Mark, as one forgets about wood shavings left after creating a perfect sculpture. He forgot about the dead birds, as one forgets about weeds pulled from a garden bed. The world narrowed to this small, shining island of health, which he had walled off from the chaos of existence with his will. He was the guardian of this paradise, and the price seemed insignificant to him. The first alarming bell rang in mid-autumn. Eve, while playing, stumbled on a steep staircase and plummeted down an entire flight. Viktor, rushing to her, already envisioned cracked bones, blood, already felt the thin fabric of her well-being tearing. But Eve got up, brushed off her dress, and looked at him with surprise, as if not understanding his horror. There wasn't even a scratch on her knee. No bruise. Not a single tear. She simply stood up and ran on, leaving him alone on the stairs, his heart pounding in his throat. This was impossible. It violated not only the grand laws of existence, but also the simple laws of flesh and bone. That evening, when Eve fell asleep, he sat beside her bed and for the first time in a long while looked into her inner pattern again. What he saw sent a chill down his spine. The pattern was in place. It was clear even, radiant with health. But it was frozen. It no longer resembled a living, trembling fabric where myriads of tiny stitches were born and died every second, where the design constantly changed, breathed, lived. Now it was a flawless but lifeless tapestry. He hadn't healed her. He had replaced her original, imperfect, and vulnerable pattern with his own, perfect, logical, and absolutely predictable. He had protected her from randomness, depriving her of the very essence of life, which is a continuous, chaotic change of states. He understood that her fall on the stairs was not a miracle. It was simply that his scheme, his blueprint of her existence, did not account for fractures. In her pattern, there was no thread for pain, no thread for weakness, no thread for tears from a bruised knee. He had pulled them all out when he extracted the thread of her illness. He had created not a healthy child, but a perfect mechanism clothed in his daughter's flesh. And this mechanism, like any other, required constant maintenance. From that day on, his life transformed into an endless vigil. He became not a father, but a caretaker. Every night he sat by her bed and peered into her pattern, like a gardener tending to a precious yet capricious plant. He saw how, through contact with the world and its chaos, the threads in her ideal tapestry thinned here and there. A classmate's slight cold rubbed against her pattern, attempting to breach it. A random bump in the street threatened to leave a scuff mark. Even too loud laughter, too fast to run, any manifestation of vibrant, disordered energy left microscopic cracks on her crystal structure. And he mended them, again and again. But now he didn't need grand sacrifices. He needed a constant, small tribute. He learned to draw not entire lives, but fragments of them. He would sit in cafes and subtly borrow a measure of peace from a laughing couple at a nearby table, transforming their evening into a series of minor quarrels. He would walk down the street and pull the thread of luck from a young man rushing to a job interview, dooming him to failure. He would collect crumbs of meaning from passers-by's conversations, leaving behind only emptiness and bewilderment. The world around his daughter began to slowly fade, becoming dull and meaningless, because all its vibrancy, all its life force, was siphoned off to nourish her unnatural, radiant pattern. He got what he wanted. His daughter was safe. She would never die from illness. She would never know true pain. She would live forever in this ideal, meticulously crafted world he had woven for her. But looking at her, laughing his programmed laughter, living the life he had inscribed upon her, he saw not a daughter, but his crime, his sentence. He was chained to this invisible loom forever. He couldn't leave, couldn't loosen his grip. For if he stopped mending, if he stopped stealing, the ideal pattern would unravel, and beneath it would be nothing. Only the void from which he had once woven it. He had saved her body, but her soul, her true, unpredictable self, died the very moment the first dead sparrow appeared on the windowsill. And now he was the eternal jailer of this beautiful, healthy, utterly empty shell.